So what did they call you?
I go by Ryan, my first name. I do have a graffiti name, Emyr, E-M-Y-R, but everybody calls me Ryan.
Ryan, what are you incarcerated for, sir, and how long is your sentence?
Okay, so I originally came into prison for 2 counts of attempted murder. I got sentenced to, I took a deal for 25 years at 85% with 4 strikes.
And from my understanding, you've actually picked up additional time while incarcerated as well, sir?
Yeah, I picked up time 3 different times in here for 3 separate attempted murders. I picked up 1 strike on one of them, so I've got 5 strikes total. Yeah, I picked up first one I picked up 9 years at 66%, and then the next one I got 6 years at 66%, and then I got 11 years at 66%.
Where are you from out here on the streets, right?
I'm from Huntington Beach, California.
And do you or did you at any time point in your life belong to any type of gangs, groups, organizations, or anything like that?
I was never part of a gang or anything, but I've always associated with people within gangs, you know, doing drug deals and whatnot, running around with that lifestyle.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
Okay, yeah. So my childhood was actually pretty good. My mom and dad are actually still together, and they've been together, you know, my whole life, right? I got a little brother. He's doing really well. He's actually an ER doctor, right? But see what happened with me. I was at a young age I was diagnosed with ADD. I never really did well in school. My mom was a school teacher, so I kind of felt like the pressure was on me, right? But I was always kind of overly sensitive, right? So I guess you could say I turned my sensitivities into anger. And then, you know, I grew up playing hockey, and when I hit 14 years old is when I started using smoking weed. I started drinking, and I started actually doing graffiti art. That's actually one thing that kind of opened up my mind. I'm like, wow, I got a cool talent. But at the same time, was also rebellious as well. But when I was a kid, I didn't really experience anything traumatic. I grew up in your standard white picket fence in Huntington. Okay, so I caught this case 2013 in November, and that whole year was actually pretty bad. So 2010 is when I really started going to jail. I was in and out of jail for sales. And then 2012, I did my last probation violation. I got out with no tail, which means I got out no probation, free and clear. I was good, right? But when I got out, I was continuing using right? And but 2013, it got pretty bad that year. I started off pretty bad. I actually started off the year having an abortion with a girl, and then I actually started doing witchcraft myself. I started doing witchcraft that year. I started just becoming more and more hopeless, right? And then my heroin addiction became pretty bad, and actually that probably a couple of months before I got arrested, I actually broke into my parents' house, stole a bunch of money out of their safe, right? And some of that money I was given to a friend of mine for some money for heroin, right? And that money went up missing to some other people, but I started accusing him of stealing the money. And long story short on that, I tried to kill him. I shot him, and then the person he was with, he was driving. One of his friends was driving him, and I tried to kill both of them. So that whole year, 2013, was just completely bad from the start. The drugs, it was all revolved around drugs, right? And I just kept building bad karma upon bad karma.
would you be able to take me there to that day, Ryan, and elaborate on exactly how that whole day played out? What was it that happened, and how was it that you got caught?
Yeah. I'll tell you exactly. Yeah. So that whole day, I was staying out at Motel 6 over in Westminster, and I was with a girl, and see, originally for like the past couple of weeks, I had a friend, right, and he had a gun, and him and I were kind of like conversating about this drama I had with my friend, right, and I guess you could say he was like the devil on my shoulder as well, right, negative influence, and so he had the gun. And this girl I was with, she was actually talking to my friend who I was plotting on, right? And she was so I grabbed the phone from her, and I acted like I was her talking to him, right? And so then I left the motel by myself. I picked up my friend who had the gun, and then he took the driver's seat of my truck, and I basically lured my friend who was my target at the time to like to an area, like it was in a neighborhood, and I remember so my friend at the time, he was in the passenger seat, and some guy was driving him. They were in an Audi. In fact, there's actually a newspaper article in Orange County Register too about that incident as well, if you type in my name. So what happened was, my friend that had the gun, who was driving my truck, pulled up next to him, and I pulled up and I pulled out the gun, and I was in the passenger window. I shot the driver. He got shot in the eye, and then I unloaded 7 more rounds on my friend who was my target at the time. And then we spun, and then after the gun was empty, we spun off. Right, so we spun off. We drove to my buddy's house who had the gun. I dropped him off, and then I put the gun in the hood of my car near the engine, right? I closed the thing. After that, I drove back to the motel where I was at, and the girl I was with, she's like, well, where were you? And I was like, oh, don't worry about it. I went to my friend's house, right, real quick, and then so the night went through, because the incident happened around like maybe 4 or 5 in the morning, and it was real foggy out too. I remember that, So I went back to the motel. I was with the girl. We were hanging out the rest of the night. We were doing drugs together, and after checkout time, we left. Right, we left. We were driving. And I actually remember the motel was on the one side of the 405 freeway, and the incident where it happened was the other side of the 405 freeway. So when I was driving over the bridge, I looked over the bridge and I see the cop cars still over there. I was like, okay, and she's like, what are you looking at? And I was like, oh, nothing. So what I did actually too, I told her about what I just did. So just in case I got in trouble, I wanted to use her as an alibi. Of course, she kind of freaked out because at that time, I thought I had killed 2 people, right? I didn't know they were still alive, so I told her, hey, I just killed two people. I killed so-and-so, who she knows, all right? And then so after that, I got busted 13 hours later after the incident, and I went to my dad's wood shop in Costa Mesa.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
At the time, I was driving a Ford F-150, and I had a Tanya cover at my dad's wood shop. So we went to the wood shop. We were putting the Tanya cover on. My dad pulled up the wood shop, and my dad's like, hey, Ryan, there's a bunch of cops down the street, right? And I look up in the sky, and I see the helicopter flying around. And honestly, I was kind of like in a state of denial, but I was also in a state of, like, deer in headlights, where I was just like, I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to run to make myself look guilty. So I was just like, okay, just play it cool. Maybe they're doing a raid down the street. I don't know. I was just in shock, right? So a couple hours go by, the sun starts setting. I thought it was good, you know. All right, cool. The sun's down, this and that, and I literally just get the Tanya cover on, and as I'm closing it, next you know, like a Westminster PD in full SWAT gear comes in around the corner. They handcuff my dad. They'd have their M16s out on me. They throw me to the ground. They kind of kick me a little bit. That kind of stunned me. They handcuffed me. I remember I was sitting on the curb next to an anthill, right? Because I remember all these ants were crawling over me. And they asked me the initial questions like, "Hey, what were you doing here?" Well, like at this time and that time, I was like, "Oh, I was just with this girl. I left to go get some Del Taco. I came back and we hung up, and then now here we are, right?" So they arrested me. They took the girl in too because she was still with me, and I went to Westminster PD. And I remember going in there, and I sat in the holding tank for a little bit, and they pulled me into interrogation. And I was trying to play it cool at the time to like ask me, "Hey, well, where'd you grow up? You know, where'd you go to high school? This and that." And I was answering those questions, kind of trying to play odds of like, "Hey, what's going on?" type of thing. And so then they started asking me about the guy who I had shot, right? And I was like, "Oh yeah, you know, I don't know anything about that. I don't want to talk anymore." So they put me back in the holding tank. I lawyered up, and then that's when they told me, they're like, "Hey, you're being charged with 2 counts of attempted homicide. One's in critical condition, and the other one's about to die." And then they slammed the door on me, and I was like, "Oh wow!" Like, and that's how that day went. Yeah. No, well, see, at the time, at the time when I originally got arrested, when I got handcuffed and put myself in the car, I mean, right then, sitting in the back of that cop car, I was like, it's a wrap. Like, at the time, I thought these 2 guys were dead, right? I'm like, I'm going in for a double murder. And I remember driving from Costa Mesa all the way to Westminster on the 405, just like seeing like home. Like I grew up my whole life around there, you know. And I'm just like, that's it. Like I'm gone, you know. I'm gone. So in my head, I'm like, okay, I'm facing life. That's a fact. And then when they said that, you know, when they said attempted homicide, 2 counts of attempted homicide, I was like, okay, well, maybe it won't be so bad, but either way, it's going to be bad, right? So I called my dad, and
You have 60 seconds remaining.
Let me go ahead and call you back.
Okay.
All right. Where I left off was basically at the time, I thought I was getting, you know, a life sentence, right? So I'm facing life now. I thought it was a wrap. I'm looking at where I grew up. I'm on my way to the police station, right? And so I called my dad and I asked, like, hey, they're charging me with these charges. I don't know what they're talking about. You know, call our uncle, because my uncle's a lawyer. I'm like, call him and see if he knows anything. And Dad's like, kind of like, all right, well, you know, he just didn't know, you know. Now talking to my dad now, right? He knew, like, at that time. He's like, yeah, because at that time my parents knew I was heavily into drugs, this and that, and my dad tells me now, he's like, yeah, that I remember that day. It was like, all right, well, he's in God's hands now, right? He's gonna be safe. Because honestly, it's a tragedy that saved my life. It really was, right? But at that day and time, it was. I felt numb. I felt tired. I guess looking back on it subconsciously, it was kind of like relieved. I'm off the streets, right? I don't know how to describe that. I mean, I'm not relieved people got hurt, you know. But at that time, I was still in that zone, right? And it's funny, or not really funny, but 4 days prior to that, I got this girl and I, when we were hanging out, we got pulled over. We got possession. We both went to county jail, and we got a DA reject. We got sent back out. So when I was in county jail, I was in a certain pod in the main jail of that main jail in Santa Ana. And then 4 days later, I come back, you know, fighting 2 counts of attempted murder. And yeah, so devastated, numb, and also a deer in headlights is probably what I was feeling that day.
So what did you end up pleading out to, man? What did you end up getting sentenced to?
So I took it. So for about a year, I was fighting 30 to life, and they finally came with a deal with no life sentence. So the deal was I take 4 strikes and 25 years, and that's it, right? So I signed for that deal for 2 counts of attempted murder, and so they added on the residential burglary that I broke into my parents' house that day because when I originally broke into my parents' house, my mom didn't know who it was. She called the cops. They took my fingerprints. They found my fingerprints, but my mom didn't want to press charges. But when they took me on this case, the DA pulled that up. They also got me in possession of ammunition. I got a 10-year.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
I had a 10-year gun enhancement. And then that possession that I got 4 days prior to that, they added that on too. So I had 2 counts of attempted murder, residential burglary, possession of ammunition, shooting into occupied vehicle, and possession of a controlled substance, methamphetamine.
And at this point in time, are there already like politics in the county jail before you even hit the prison system? Like are they already trying to pull you in?
Yeah, so like basically when you're in the active side, and it's all racially segregated, right? So when you're active, and see, I'm white, right? So I'm automatically in the white car. They call it the white car, right? So like they're not trying to pull you in. You're basically already in it, right? It's like you're doing what they're doing, and that's it, basically. Like you're a part of like it's gang mentality, right? You're part of the white gang, you know. So yeah, at that time, and especially with someone like me who's fighting all this time, because there's a lot of people that are in and out of there. So people with life sentences, and a lot of time are kind of expected to, put in work, to take the burden off people with a shorter amount of time, right? So yeah, at that time, they're not trying to pull me into it. You're just already in it, regardless, on the active side. And that's where I was at that time.
What is the first prison you landed at, man? And what was that experience like?
Okay, so when I finally got sentenced, I went up to Wasco State Prison for reception, and that was September of 2014, right? So at the time, going up to prison, so 25 years, 85%, I'd be doing 21 years total. So I'm like, I just want to go to prison. I kind of want to lay low, try to do my time and not catch more time, right? So when I'm in Wasco reception, I'm there for about 3 months, and I get assessed to a level 3, right? So I have 59 points, which is the most you can have for a level 3 prison, and I'm just kind of waiting on getting transferred. And then it was actually a couple days before Christmas. The yard, the whites, they're like, hey, this guy, he's acting up. He needs to get removed, right? They call it remove. So they asked me and this other youngster just to beat him up with our hands, right? To basically jump him on the yard. And I was like, oh man. First I was kind of like, oh man, I'm going level 3, but oh well, it is what it is, right? And because they were kind of pushing it like, hey, you haven't put in any work, I'm like, all right, well, it's kind of like, all right, what do I do? I guess I'm just going to go with the flow here. So this youngster and I, we put hands on this guy. So sure enough, my transcript gets canceled. Now I'm a level 4 points. Now I'm waiting. Now I'm just waiting again. So now I'm kind of stuck at reception. Then a couple months fly by, and I'm in visiting, and visiting's behind the glass. Right? My mom and dad came up to see me. I hung up the phone. I'll go back in the holding tank. This other white guy and I are sitting there, and then this white guy comes in, sits down, and see, at the time, through the politics, it's not like that anymore, but like this guy, he was a white Crip, right? And back then, white Crips were on site for us, for the whites. So this other white guy and I, we got off on the white Crip, and ironically, the white Crip's last name was McAllister as well, right? Which is a trip, like another McAllister, because that's my last name. So that's ironic. So there I caught another battery. So now I'm really stuck in reception. And then around March of 2015, there was this guy on the yard from the county, and he was in the hat. They call it the hat. The hat is something like when you're in trouble with like the higher ups with like prison politics, you get put in the hat, and basically you're no good anymore. You have to get stabbed. You have to get like got, right? So they're like, hey, Eddie's from Orange County. So the yard comes up to me again, like, hey, this guy's from Orange County. He's in the hat. Like, are you interested in doing this? You know. And now I'm at the point where I'm like,
this call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
Now I'm at the point where I'm like, you know what, screw it. Like, that would be my way out of reception, because I would go to the hole, catch a shoe term, and get out of here almost, right? Because for the last 6 months, it was live and in concert right there for me in Wasco, you know. So they gave me a little piece of metal. I make a knife on. It wasn't a big knife, right? And they told me like, hey, just hit them a couple times so we can go to the hole. They can toss them back there and figure out what they're trying to do. So we go out the yard, and it was with me and this little other youngster came with me. So I stabbed him a couple times, and this little youngster and I, we beat him up with our hands. I passed the knife off to somebody else. Well, the guy I passed the knife off to, he got in trouble with the knife. We go to the hole regardless, because like when there's a stabbing, you go to the hole regardless. So I go to the hole in Wasco. They assess me. I get a shoe term for 1.5 years, right? And I'm at Wasco. So that was the first prison I was at. I mean the whole mentality. I mean, especially for the active side, really. It's just kind of like it makes it like it's glorified, right? And especially like going to the shoe, right? Now I'm in the shoe, I'm in the hole, and now the violence is even more glorified. Like they call it like that's where the quote unquote that's where the cool kids go, right? You're in the shoe, you're in there for a stabbing, and then you're surrounded with that mentality, right? And then it becomes just like, oh, that's just how it is, like you know how it is, whatever, like. And then, you know, for me, being sent for so long in prison, like, okay, this is my life now. So I started developing that mindset, right? That's what it started in the shoe. My first shoe term. And now I've got 3 shoe terms, and every time you become a little bit more like bloodthirsty, right? Because you're surrounded by the people who are like pulling the strings, right? So as far as dirty politics go, I would just say like the whole mentality behind encouraging the encouragement for people to do that kind of stuff, right? Because at the same time, like, you know, you're making an attempt on someone's life, and that idea becomes normalized in there. That's actually a traumatic thing for, you know, normal people like in society, right? It's a traumatic thing. Well, traumatic things for society becomes normalized in here, and becomes glorified, right? So, you know, you're kind of like, hey, do you want to be a sheep or do you want to be a wolf? You know, and it's like, all right, well, which one do I want to be, right? And when in reality, actually, you become a sheep and you become a puppet, right? So I don't know if you want me to go into other stories on what happened with my other shoe terms and my other prison too.
Yes, please go ahead and elaborate.
Okay, go. Yeah, I'm just gonna go through my whole prison cycle in a nutshell, right? So I caught my shoe term in Wasco, and then I went to Tehachapi, which is ironically where I'm at right now, but it's the mainline now. But so Tehachapi was a shoe. So I was in Tehachapi for 3 months, and then they closed down Tehachapi to turn it into a mainline. Right. So hold on 1 second. Hey, you have to use the restroom. Don't flush. So they closed down Tehachapi to turn into a mainline. then they sent us all to Pelican Bay, right? So I got shipped up to Pelican Bay. I finished out like 6 months of my shoe term in the shoe right there, Pelican Bay shoe, and then I got kicked out to the level 4 180 right there, right? I was out there for about 2 years, right, almost 2 years. So the first year I was out there, it was cool. I mean, it wasn't cool, but I stayed cool, right? I wasn't doing drugs. I wasn't cooking whiskey or making Pruno, nothing like that. And then I remember they got a new set of cops in our building in my cell at the time. He was like, "Hey, it's cool to cook whiskey." I was like, I was excited about it at the time because I was still in my addiction, still an alcoholic. So he taught me how to cook whiskey. And then when we started cooking whiskey, we started selling whiskey for drugs and doing drugs. And then for about
You have 60 seconds remaining.
I'm gonna go ahead and call you back.
Okay.
Okay.
Please go ahead and proceed, Brian.
Okay, cool. So we were selling whiskey, doing drugs. So for the last 8 months before my second shoe term, I was strung out on heroin, strung out on speed, right? And so around July 2018, there was a guy. He came out of the hole, right? He's 8 months in the hole, and he came out to the yard. I was on A yard at the time. He was on B yard, but he came out of the hole. He was down on A yard with us in Pelican Bay. And he's like, "Yeah, I was in the hole for exposing myself to staff, right?" So he had a sex charge, and like on the active side, that's like a huge no-no. We were all kind of like, "Oh, whoa, but he was like, "Oh, like, but I got a pass." I was like, "Okay, yeah, for sure." Like, so we kind of play along. Now this is the thing they call sharking. They call it sharking, right? It's basically where you befriend your victim, right? And so at the time, I didn't know I was the one that was the one that was going to be stabbing this guy, right? He was a defender now. So like the guy who had my building, he came up to me, right? And this is when I'm strung on heroin, and it's also at the time too the cap for your drug debts on that yard, where you can only spend up to $200, right? Well, at the time I'm $3,000 in debt, right? I'm basically playing with my life at that point. But the way I justified it was, there's a bunch of other, dope fiends around here that are more in debt than me. So as long as I could stay under them, but at the same time, I'm playing with my life. You're not supposed to do that kind of stuff, right? So the guy who has the building, he pulls me up and he's like, "Hey, how do you feel about this issue right here?" I was like, "Hey, honestly, like, if you guys need someone to stab him, like, I'm down." And so at the time, I was looking at it as like a way off this yard because I'm strung out. I'm tired of being in debt. Most of all my canteen is going to the dope connects, right? Every month. My cellie, wasn't the greatest influence as well. Like, we were terrible influences for each other as far as the drugs go. So I'm like, "Yeah, hey, if you guys need someone to stab him, I'll do it. I'll do it." And he's like, "Okay, well," he's like, "we'll get you on that." And he's like, "Well, how much money do you owe now?" I was like, "Oh," I lied to him. I'm like, "Yeah, I only owe about like $700." He's like, "Oh," he's like, "Man, the cap's $200." I'm like, "I know, but I've been paying here and there, so I'm not like, no one's tripping on me." He's like, all right, it's fine, So for about a week before I stabbed him, right, I befriended him, right? And this is what they call sharking, right? They call it sharking. So I'm basically studying him. I'm walking laps with him, getting to know him, and I'm training him to be on my left side because I have a pocket on my right side, and I'm right-handed. So that's where the knife's going to be. So as we're walking laps for the whole week, I'm just like studying his mannerisms, his awareness, and like practicing in my head to stab him, right? So the day comes when the day comes when I'm stabbing him, right? So a guy brings a knife out for me. I grab the knife, put it in my pocket. I meet up with the victim, and we just start walking laps. And next you know, I turn on him. Everything goes as planned. I jumped on him, stabbed him about like 10 times right there until the cops, they throw like these little percussion grenades to because once the cops throw the percussion grenades, you better get off the victim, because if you don't get off, then they got the Mini 14, which is a rifle caliber round, right? And they'll shoot you. So once the grenades went off, I jumped off them, and that's how I caught my second shoe term. So now I'm gonna shoot. Now I caught a 2 shoe term this time. So I'm in the shoe, and now I'm a little bit more enthralled by it. You know, like I'm a second term shoe term guy. I'm in Pelican Bay shoe, and the other thing too about Pelican Bay, you're kind of relieved when you go to the shoe because it rains. It rains 9 months out of the year right there. It's the wettest city in California. So as whites when you're on the main line, the level 4, yard is mandatory. So you're constantly in rain. It sucks. We call it Punishment Bay. Like that place was built on psychological warfare. Originally it was built for the worst of the worst, and they built it so far up north. It's on the border of Oregon and the coast of right. So it's as far as you can be from your family. And so you're kind of relieved when you go to the shoe because you're out of the rain, right? But at the same time, like the sun never hits your skin for those 2 years. It's as if
this call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
It's as if you're underground. Like you have a little yard area, and you can look up to the sky. That's all you can see, right? In fact, they even did a 60-minute special on Oprah did. So I did my 2 shoe term, and I come out of the shoe now, right? And I come back to the same yard. I'm kind of like, okay, great. Like, you know, I wonder who's still here, who I still owe money to. So I come out to the yard. This is right after COVID. I got out July 13th of 2020. So there actually, luckily, wasn't any drugs in the yard because there was no visits, right? That's usually how the drugs come in, through visiting. And so I was on the yard. Only about half the people I owed were out there. So I paid off $1,500 within the next, 3-4 months, and everything was all good, right? So on this time I was on the main line for only 9 months, and then I caught my third attempted murder. So I had a cellie at the time, and my cellie, he was an oddball. He was kind of a compulsive liar, and no one in the yard really liked him. So I did my best to try to kind of spruce him up, like, hey, like this, help him carry himself a little bit better. He's 50 years old. He's been doing this a long time, but he's with the bullshit, right? So, but also at the same time, me coming out of the shoe for the second time, I had like that mindset of like, now I'm like, now I'm part of this, like prison is me now, I had no problem going back to the shoe again. I was like down for the cause, I like to call myself a hitter at the time, right? So I'm with this cellie for about 9 months, and so it was around the middle of March of 2021. Him and I were in the cell, and I joke around a lot, and sometimes I come off as a little aggressive, especially then, right? I'm a different person now, but I used to come off as aggressive, and I was just joking with him, clowning with him, and one day he kind of just flipped out. He's like, I can't take this anymore, I'm going to move out. I'm like, well, and I was just joking. I'm like, oh, you're not going anywhere. Like, you can be here so I can supervise you. I'm just joking with him. He took it serious. Then when he went to pill call, he told the cops at the little rotunda in front of like multiple other people that go to pill call, oh, hey, if you don't move me, you guys are gonna have a body on your hands, right? And I didn't know that. So he comes back and he's moving his stuff. I'm like, how'd you get to move? Because like normally cops don't just do moves like that. And he's like, oh, I just told him how to go. So he moved 2 cells away, and then people are coming to me like, hey, he said this. He said, hey, if they don't move him, you guys are gonna have a body on your hands, this and that. So basically, I took that as a threat to my life, right? I also took it as an opportunity to indulge in the bloodthirsty behavior like that I was becoming, right? So at that time, I asked the yard, like the guys who like the shot callers of the yard, for permission, right? It wasn't like a a thing where I had to do anything. They're like, okay, well, you have 3 options. They told me you can either ignore it, you can beat him up with your hands and feet, or you can stab him. But if you want to stab him, you better make sure you kill him, because you're going to make it serious and then do it like serious. I was like, okay. So me being bloodthirsty, I chose the third one. I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to kill him then. So for about a week, I cut a knife off my locker. Right, we used like a little black clip that used paper clips, right? And it took me about a week to cut it off. It was 9 inches long, right? I made this knife, and then at the time, so about like a month after he moved out is when it happened. I remember it was April 13th, 2021. And so I signed, so like the porters go around for phone sign-ups at the time. This is before we had tablets. And so I signed him and me up for the same phone time, so both our doors would open at the same time. And he was only 2 cells away. And so basically at the time, I had a bag of laundry, because at the time also too, I gave him, I was still acting like I was his friend, right? Hey, everything's all good, nothing like that. I wanted him to be at ease, like they call it sharking, I gave him some psych meds that I've known to make people fall asleep, right? So, but I told him they were muscle relaxers, right? Oh, hey, because I know you like to get high, so I was hoping he'd be asleep in the cell, right? Because my goal was to kill him, so I wanted him to be fully like out, And the mentality I was working with was like psycho stuff, right? And then I had a bag of laundry with me to like hide the knife behind. So if he did wake up, it would just look like I'm handing him a bag of laundry, right? So then both our doors open. I come out. He actually walks out of the cell, and so I improvised. I remember I was like, hey, I'm about to get on the phone and I'm going to get that music catalog. I'm about to order a package, right, to get him go back into his cell. So as soon as he goes back into his cell, I stab him. I put him on the ground. I hit him about probably like 3 or 4 times, but keep in mind this knife is 9 inches long and 1 inch thick, right? And that's the most blood I've ever seen. Like it hit the ceiling in the cell. The cell is 8 feet tall, keep in mind, and the whole floor was covered in blood. So, luckily, thank God, he knew how to fight for his life, right? So he eventually grabbed on my wrist that had the knife, and then by the time he did that, the cops came and it was over. So I backed out. I got cuffed up, and I've got blood. I remember up to my elbows, like looked like red paint. Like I dipped my hands up to my elbows in red paint and came up. And I remember the cops. In fact, I remember this one lady on my second stabbing. She was like one of the cops that was like, she took me to medical because I got some scrapes on my knees. And now she's cuffing me up again for my third attempt at murder. And she goes, what the fuck? You can't stay fucking out of trouble? I remember that, And at the time, I was kind of nervous because I was told, hey, if you want to stab him, you better make sure you kill him, right? And, I get that look as if, hey, if you don't do it right, then it's my ass. So at the time, and this is how sick the mentality can get, is while I was in the holding tank, because they take you to a holding tank, and you go into like a phone booth cage, about the size of a phone booth, and you're caged up in there, and I'm like hoping he's dead. I'm like, oh my God, I hope he's dead, otherwise I'm going to be in trouble, So like your goals become like, when you become like enthralled in that lifestyle, your goals become like the opposite of what a healthy member of society would be. I went into prison. Obviously, I deserved to go in prison. I shot 2 people, and then it just got worse, right? So then I get the lockup order come back, and it says attempted murder, and I'm like,
this call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
I'm bummed out, right? And then so I go to the hole, and I'm in the hole. So I was kind of like, okay, whatever. And when I was in the hole, people were like, oh yeah, you shined. Like that's what they say. Like when you do a good job at your whatever kind of violence you're proceeding with, right? They say, oh, you shot.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
Let me go ahead and call you back.